You think we should call this video Men in Hats? Masculine men in hats?
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It's a dying breed.
Well, shalom.
Shalom.
You know, I wore a hat from the time I was a little 13-year-old kid.
Oh.
I was told you're not allowed to pray without your hat. You're not allowed to say the blessing after meals without your hat. So I'm always wearing that hat. It was a very big hat. It was black, though. I was
it's
not able to wear a hat like this.
Interesting that you mentioned that, because obviously they put such an emphasis. The hat is far less important than the kippah on the traditional values. But I have been personally struggling with, why do I even wear my kippah? Because at the end of the day, I don't have any ties to the community, right? I'm following God's law because it should be stressed from a Judaic standpoint that if you do not follow the decrees and the ordinances of God, then you have God's wrath you have to deal with. They always frame it in a sense that you have to watch out for the religious authority. And there's no difference between them and the mob. But the mob's a lot more dangerous than, depends, I suppose, who you're going over. But typically, as a statement, the mob is actually, have a set of balls, and so.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely empty threats considering that they don't actually have any power. And unfortunately, religious Judaism is just dying out in general. By their own admission, they don't even know how to classify people as Jewish. If their father's Jewish, their mother's Jewish, people are getting intermarried, and they don't even know who's a Jew anymore. Of course, they don't have the definition that a Jew just means someone who follows the Torah.
To not get sidetracked, the reason I'm mentioning the whole kippah thing is because when you find out that it really only got established by the time of the Talmud, you're dealing with just an absurd premise in general, which is Judaism was created 3,500 years ago. God said, follow the decrees and the ordinances written in this book. Don't stray from the right or to the left of it. And then 1,500 years later, 1,500 years later, we established things like the kippah, like Purim, like Hanukkah, and all the nonsensical claims in addition to that. But those three are on the societal stage as the kippah is the most important thing to keep on your head. I can't believe that the Talmud actually says you cannot walk 3 steps without your kippah, and you can't even walk up straight.
Yeah. So. Well, yeah, I was telling you about that the other day. On the same page of the Talmud, it says you cannot walk 4 cubits, 4 paces without covering your head, the kippah, and you cannot walk 4 paces with yourself having your back straight. Mm-hmm. So if you have your back straight, you cannot walk 4 cubits like that because you're too haughty. So they're literally telling people that you have to be bent over, have scoliosis, and always
they're killing their minds. They're killing their neurology. They're killing their confidence. Their beauty,
masculinity.
Their masculinity. Yeah.
Yeah, their beauty, their humanity, for sure. And what's happening with all of that severity is they're not acknowledging how much severity they're placing on a fucking kippah. You're right.
It is
you're
funny. Obviously,
right.
It goes a step further, but even on Jordan Peterson's 7 rules for life, the first one is stand up straight.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
12 rules.
Oh, it's the 12 rules. I thought it was 7 rules because this guy came out.
There's 12 more.
There's 12 more books now. And so that one is the only one I've read personally, and certainly gave me a lot of insight into life in general. It's beautiful. I highly recommend that for people who are looking for a good read.
Big fan.
Yeah. Well, we came together today in order to change up the background. We're no longer in Shirley's bunker. We have come to my bunker. And I have red background.
Yes. I'm excited personally to change,
it's
cool.
It up. It's cool. It's cool. I mean, I think some of the things we might want to discuss today when going over the checklist, just kind of, letting the dialogue flow, is just how harmful the Talmud is and the things that it says in there, because people have no idea. You see, this is exactly why I don't follow the Talmud and the Mishnah, why the 5 books of Moses contains all of the information, because it does not add value to my life. it actually harms the society of the people who follow it. And at the end of the day, for all the rationalists, you're adding these things to your life because they add value. The core values of the Bible are what allowed this country to flourish and to exist. As far as human history goes, America has got some of the most superb history, if not the most, in terms of freedom and fighting for people's rights, which, by the way, only comes from a biblical standard that you have God-given rights, that your life matters, that you're supposed to have freedoms. Prior to that, there wasn't a lot of that in culture, and you have huge empires like the Greek and the Roman Empire that did fall for very similar reasons to the generation that we're experiencing right now. Homosexuality, a thinning out of borders. You know what somebody told me at a consult? He told me that he saw, he was at the border because he crossed into Mexico to go visit his family, and he's coming back with his family. And he saw some guy give like a suitcase of cash over to the Border Patrol woman. And in their minds, they were so innocent with the thought that they figured, oh man, I guess we just have to pay. But they had cash and they had pesos because of their transition to Mexico. And they went up to the Border Patrol and said, here's the money for entry. And the lady was like, are you trying to bribe me? And then they put them into like lockdown.
But the other person could bribe them?
Yeah, of course. I'm saying they're probably working with the cartel and stuff. The point is that the borders are thin, right? The cartel is a huge
unjust
thing.
And the crossing. And
correct. I mean, Donald Trump just became president barely, and
not yet.
Still not yet. It's so strange. But the point is that you have a rise in homosexuality, a glorification of genitalia. I think people are pretty familiar with the small penis, the small ego, and nowadays it's big dick energy, big dick. You know, and it's like, well, it's exactly that. It's literally the same thing. And it was glorified and considered attractive. It was in the art, and now it's the other way around. And there's rampant homosexuality, probably not like any other time in history. I was just telling somebody, like, dude, like, I mean, we went from like 3% when I was like a kid. I've seen some numbers and certain statistics as high as 30%.
Yeah, I've seen over 20%.
Yeah, over 20%. I mean, that's like,
no, it's frightening.
That's astronomical in terms of increase.
It lets you know that it's actually something that's being pushed and celebrated, and it's 100% correct to say that the least of our concerns are the kippa or the size of the genitalia. Like these sidebars in people's minds, these insignificant things. People aren't thinking about the bigger picture. They're not thinking about who is God, what are his commandments, and nothing else matters. Like,
but also, does it add value to your life? And
of course, yeah,
of course it does. Of course,
well,
I mean, it
the
allows
thing is,
people
they present it as an obligation or something that you need, right? But you
Jews
don't.
would need to, by the way. That's what I'm saying, is Jews actually need to follow the decrees and the ordinances.
Exactly.
Or they get wrath of God.
But if it's
the
not,
evidence shows that promise is true.
But if it's not one of God's decrees and ordinances, then they're not obligated to follow it.
No, of course not.
And that's the distinction that's so important, that's missing in the dialogue. Everything's just put forward as, this is all the word of God, this is all what you're obligated to do. Mm-hmm. It's like, the word of God. I mean, you don't say that lightly.
Like I said, I put it all together so people could know even the laws fall in the 5 books of Moses. This is just the compiled commandments that we can follow, not including the building and maintenance of the temple, or sacrifice for animals. And most of that's temple oriented anyways. And it's so wonderful because it just allows people to treat each other and to treat themselves appropriately, to have these boundaries. Like, this is kind of the thing with people's lifestyle and their actions. So when they do something so awful, like, there's no coming back from it. I deal with a lot of people in addiction, and like, once you've done heroin, like, you've opened that door, there's no coming back, man, and it's the same with a lot of these people's actions. They'll end up in prison, right? They'll do something awful and they'll get caught, and then they'll feel sorrow, and then they'll have to do all these other things. It's like, well, that is the human condition. So is there information that allows us to live above all that, right? And the only place that it is in the 5 books of Moses. It's the only literature that I know that gives tactical response on how to act. I'll let you speak a little bit, but when you're ready, I'd like to just read a couple of the laws of human treatment, which again, I can quote verse by verse by verse of where it is. And if you're ever curious, oh, is that really in the 5 books of Moses? This book shows you exactly where it is. And the best form is just go read the 5 books of Moses yourself.
Yeah, the absolute standard for life, a vision of life, and what life is about. And people read the Torah and it seems archaic, and they're like, "Oh, this is so simple. It's kind of, ancient." But again, we haven't evolved past our humanity. We haven't evolved past God, and maybe we should actually tap into the part of ourselves that resonates with this and understands that it's directly part of the fabric of existence, as it just speaks to life directly and to the conditions that we find ourselves in personally, in relationship to God, in relationship to other human beings.
Well, people should know that the laws for the Jewish people are for the entire world, but there are specific laws that are only commanded for the people who want to be holy. So there's normal, right? There's evil, and like evil is supposed to be destroyed, right? And so then there's normal, baseline, healthy, perhaps, and then there's holy. So you can choose at to what point you want to be, but once you go below normal baseline, you're actually considered evil. And if we had a righteous justice system, we'd want to put people like that to death, which is a crazy thing to say, but we have a justice system that puts people to death all the time for completely immoral reasons. So if you integrate these laws into the justice system, then you actually have more righteous justice, less death, and more appropriate feelings towards the matters. So I'll just jump into like a category, which is like laws of human treatment, how to treat your fellow. And it starts in Exodus 23:7. Do not execute the innocent or the righteous, for I shall not exonerate the wicked. Exodus 23:9. Do not oppress a stranger. You know the feelings of a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Leviticus 19, line 11. And you shall not lie to one another. Leviticus 19:14. You shall not curse the deaf, and you shall not place a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am Hashem. Leviticus 19:15. You shall not commit a perversion of justice. You shall not favor the poor, and you shall not honor the great. With righteousness shall you judge your fellow. Leviticus 19:16. You shall not be a gossip monger amongst your people. You shall not stand aside while your fellow's blood is shed. I am Hashem. Leviticus 19:17. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall reprove your fellow and do not bear a sin because of him. Leviticus 19:18. You shall not take revenge, and you shall not bear a grudge against the members of your people, and you shall love your fellow as yourself. Leviticus 19:28.
Can I just interject there?
Mm-hmm.
Love your fellow as yourself. So people say, oh, it's the golden rule. So some say Hillel in the Talmud or in the Mishnah invented this term saying like, love your fellow as yourself. That's the main thing in the Torah. And then you have in the golden rule in the New Testament, do unto others as you want to be done to yourself. And someone told me that in one of the books in the New Testament, it says, here I will teach you a new commandment, which is love each other. And she told me that was like her favorite line in the New Testament. And
It's not that new.
It's not that new. It's literally in Leviticus. Love your fellow as yourself. I mean, it doesn't get more extreme than that.
It doesn't get clearer.
And it doesn't get clearer than that as to what truly means to love your fellow as yourself. I mean, it's such an unbelievable demand of love for one another. And it comes all the way from the beginning.
You see the clarity there, right? Now, the Orthodox position in the laws of the Bible is that you always want to ask questions that are not actually relevant, and you want to pretend that that undermines the law itself. So here's a good example, because I've heard it many, many times. You shall love your fellow as yourself. Well, what if you don't love yourself? Right? How many times have you heard that? Right? And the whole point is, like, your stupid question does not undermine the truth of that statement.
Well, also, maybe clearly you should love yourself.
Stupid question. To be completely honest, And that's the whole thing is there's a lot of like non-questions, because you can do that to virtually everything. And it sounds, by the way, less like an adult and more like a child. Why?
Exactly. And by breaking it down into those little components, then they say, oh, now nothing's understandable. Now, of course, you need us to come save the day and tell you all what to think.
Oh, and by the way,
Right.
that takes a half hour to break down a single line
Yeah.
too. So it comes out to the same
Oh,
conclusion.
a half
which
hour,
is-
you'd be lucky.
yeah.
How about like
Yeah.
half a lifetime?
Half a lifetime.
Or a whole lifetime, which is
Yeah.
actually what they encourage you. A whole lifetime, sit in yeshiva, which is what they tell you in yeshiva. This would be your greatest fulfillment, is if you could just sit here and read Talmud your whole life.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, wow, you know, that's
I
the
mean,
things
it's a book
they
of
tell
actions.
people. It's a book of
insane.
actions. It's a book of life. You know, of course, the yeshiva concept is nowhere in the Torah.
Well, again, these are, I could just say back to back so many different ways to improve society and the quality of life. You see, in the Talmud, you know, that's where all the pedophilia comments come from, like all the elitism comes from, which does not exist. Like, we are supposed to treat converts on a higher level than we even treat everybody else, because they're making a commitment to God, and they were not born in that environment. They were not born with that education up until that point. So
And they
it is upon
willingly-
us to provide for them.
And they willingly took it upon themselves to live that way, recognizing what it means to be part of God's covenant. And it's not light at all. You know, like you literally have to circumcise yourself.
Mhm.
Okay, that's crazy, you know? And so for people to take that willingly on themselves, of course, God tells us to love them, you know, additionally, even.
Yes, and that's what I was going to read, just a little bit more laws so that you can see how quick and easy it all is. Leviticus 19:32. In the presence of an old person you shall rise, and you shall honor the presence of a sage, and you shall revere your God. I am Hashem. Exodus 22:20. Shall not taunt or oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not cause pain to any orphan or widow, if you dare to cause him pain. For if he cry out to me, I shall surely hear his outcry. My wrath shall blaze, and I shall kill you by the sword, and your wives will be widows, and your children's orphans. If you encounter an ox of your enemy or his donkey wandering, you shall return it to him repeatedly. I mean, let's just talk like key roles right now. We just did a couple things.
Of your enemy.
People are respecting elders. They're being respectful in general. I want a society where there's respectful people. 2, you're treating orphans and widows, okay? So, first of all, how to treat women in general, okay? And these are women with terrible tragedies in their life, okay? You want a society that takes care of these people, that gives additional care towards them. God himself is flared on behalf of the injustice that goes on in a constant.
Which is also very powerful. God is telling us that he has additional mercy on those who are less fortunate, you know, and that's a very important thing to remember in society, is to help. And again, you have these laws of charity too, where you have to leave the corner of your field, the extra gleanings of your crop for the widow and the orphan, for these people, and for the sojourner and the convert who God wants you to help. You know, he wants us to help each other.
Well, that's we even went a step further, which is even the property of your enemy you shall return to him if he's wandering.
That's how far it goes.
Exodus 23:5. If you see the donkey of somebody you hate crouching under its burden, would you return from helping him? You shall help him repeatedly. And look, if there's any way to quash bad blood between you and an individual,
just help them in their time of need.
That would be the way to do it. And God creates the path for it, and he's written it down. The path's always created far before the Bible. We have an information source that can allow a nation of people to come together. That's the foundation for the Jews.
By the way, that encourages a peaceful society, right?
Of course.
If enemies still have to be nice to each other in their time of need, you know, if you still have to help your fellow, if his donkey's crunching under the burden, you know, you help him, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it even goes so far to be attentive even to someone's emotions, right? So Leviticus 25:17, each of you shall not aggrieve his fellow, and you shall fear your God, for I am Hashem your God. You know, again, Deuteronomy 22:4, you shall not see the donkey of your brother or his ox falling on the road and hide yourself from them. You shall surely stand them up with him. We're here to serve. You know, you create a society of people. You see somebody needs help, go ahead and help them.
Mm.
And the favor will come to you tenfold if you continue to be like that. That's what a righteous person is. That's what a blessed person is. Just to finish off with the last one before you get into converts or animal treatment, Deuteronomy 24:6. One shall not take a lower or upper millstone as a pledge, for he would be taking a life as a pledge. Just to explain that, because most people don't know what a millstone is in general. A millstone is those giant stones you use for crushing, grinding
stuff,
wheat.
Yeah.
And if you were to, it's basically like saying,
This is livelihood.
well, it's kind of like saying, what's
You take someone's car,
take the shovel away from a gardener. You know?
Yeah.
And so it's like, he's going to dig with his hands.
Exactly.
Right? And so, the point here is, you do not take away people's livelihoods, because you would be taking a life as a pledge, a man's work, what somebody does to provide for his family. Like, this is life. There's nothing that is so accurate to the world that I live in, the world that my parents talk about. You see, despite the changes in seasons and culture, right, we still have these same foundational truths.
That's 100%. And if you have these foundational truths, then you know how to get through even trying times, because this guidance stands eternity. And eternity is a big deal. God makes this an eternal covenant, and that's repeated many times in the Torah. And so, regarding the name Israel, how God tells Moses to go to Pharaoh and say, my firstborn is Israel. It's like, of course, everyone's God's children, but God is saying his firstborn is Israel. Right? And like in the Torah, there's a lot about firstborns, and Esau sells his firstborn to Jacob for soup, the red stuff, right? But firstborn gets double portion even by the standard of the Torah in terms of inheritance. So for Israel, the people, to be the firstborn, it just means that we're given this task, and I'm a firstborn. So I was always told, like, you're like the trailblazer, so like you are, right? And so you have this additional responsibility, and that's to reference the elitism that you were saying that the Jews seem to have, like, oh, better than thou. It's like, that's not the narrative of the Torah at all.
Actually, in the Talmud, it literally says...
Oh, no, it says non-Jews are not called humans. It says,
yes,
apparently you can steal from non-Jews. I mean, horrific stuff.
Responses that they're projecting onto other cultures and people.
Absolutely.
Again, nowhere is that in the Torah or the Bible.
No, God forbid. I mean, the Torah encourages human treatment. So that's a good name.
Just to get an idea.
Categorization.
Nowhere, back to the beginning of our conversation, right? Nowhere in the Bible or the Torah are there things like a kippah. Can't find it anywhere. Not even in the New Testament are there things like kippahs, okay? There is no rabbi either. The rabbi does not exist in the Bible. Something to pay attention to.
Yeah, there's courts.
There's courts, there's judges, there's righteous men, but there's no rabbis. So they've created this invisible authority that, the Rebbe is the most respectable and most powerful, the one that holds up the world. That's just not the case. It's just like hardworking people who continue to implement the actions in the Bible over and over again. But other things as well. Hanukkah is not there. Purim is not there. It just feels silly to me that I'm going to follow, like, the only good reason to follow the 5 books of Moses is because you believe that narrative actually happened. There's a level of faith, a high level of faith that goes into, I was not there 3,500 years ago, but there's tons of evidence to make that look like it was highly likely. I would say the number one thing is the survival of the Jews themselves. 3,500 years of a tormented people who are still here. They're still here because of the promise in the Bible that says, despite whether you go with me or you go against me, because of the forefathers, I will not break that promise, and you guys will always be around. Like that's extremely profound. There's very few things that line up. Like, we know we're going to die, right? And we know the Jews are still around. And it's
exactly.
Like,
it seems to be.
I grew up in that, and so when I got to the point where, okay, why are you Jewish? Why are you following these things? Well, I do believe in that narrative. And what does the narrative ask you? Do not stray to the right or the left of the commandments in this book, but follow them, and they will be the source of your life and where all the blessing comes from. And then you have shit that comes 1,500 years later. By the way, not to mention stuff that's happening now all the time too. Let's get into wigs and shaitels and
light switches.
Yeah.
Well, look, I'll tell you this. What you said about having high levels of faith in order to believe in something that, again, you weren't present for 3,000 years ago, no scientific evidence, right? What is your belief in? Your belief is in God, and in this history, as you say, which still stands, to this day. And so you're going to give that levels of faith to God himself, to the narrative that God sets forward. These things coming 1,500 years later, 2,000 years later, all these adding and subtracting to the word of God, like that's not inadmissible, information for anyone who takes their belief seriously. Like, do you know how serious it is to believe, in God and what his word, and like,
look at how much faith goes into science.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they have that same response constantly, is that like, the more we find out, the less we know.
But yeah,
right?
But it's in the faith in themselves, as in like what we determine as being
Still,
discoverable.
It's faith nonetheless. Like, there is very few absolutes either way that you cut it. So you would be making, and again, science can support the biblical narrative, right?
Yeah.
Just like many other things can and do.
It can.
It's about drawing good conclusions, but ultimately, how have we been living as people and what actually works? And the history that's been written down could be pushed away and said, you know what, I wasn't there, I didn't see the historians write it, none of that really lines up, blah, blah, blah. Right? But it's mostly uneducated people who will not read and educate themselves to it. That's why I like to tell people when reading the Bible that worst case scenario, you upgrade linguistically and you read the oldest history in antiquity. Right?
Absolutely.
And best case scenario, you do all of that and you find God in your purpose in a tactical way to live and to teach your children how to live.
Well, there's a beautiful psalm that says, your testimonies are very trustworthy. All right. And I find that to resonate, whereas like when you read the testimony in the 5 books of Moses, it's a very trustworthy narrative. You're being told something with extreme transparency, like it has the quality of revelation, right? And the ultimate revelation with the most believable narrative possible. And so again, either you're going to have faith in your own tools to measure time, space, and existence, and the past and the future.
By the way, I wouldn't tell people to not have faith in their abilities. And
yes,
the things that they
you
know.
should have faith in the ability and the things that you know, but not in the things that you don't know. Right?
Yes, and by the way, you and I have only come to this conclusion through a constant state of questioning that, whether it's questioning the authority, the foundation, the beliefs, whether or not God even exists. These are all things that you see when you read the Bible and you go through it. You're usually not saying, well, Moses questioned God, and so I'm questioning God, and then this doesn't matter. You're actually usually questioning God to the point, well, perhaps he exists, maybe he doesn't. And if you were to find God, then you can go back to the Bible and be like, oh, even Moses was questioning God.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, it's the same God.
Yeah. And if you start to use the literature as history, then a man like Moses is at the highest scale of a human that we could possibly describe. If he can question God, I don't see why you can't. I don't have a problem with that. I'd recommend just about every Jewish boy and girl to question their faith. And if they did, they'd actually come upon some really rational conclusions like, this isn't there. That's not there. God didn't ask me to do that.
Yeah. And also, though,
like
those things that do stay, those things are so real, And so the reason why, people who are raised religiously, they hold on to their faith because it provided them with something real, because it was real, and then you find things are wrong, and like then all of your belief is shattered. But the true kernel of faith is still there for what is worthy of your faith, what is actually true. So, questioning it will only get you deeper to the source of what actually is true to your soul and to your being.
Well, it's funny because the rabbinic culture, which the Talmud and the Gemara established, creates a system that is breaking you down. It's like where one of the core rules is to not think. right? But they use things like reading in loops all the time, right? They'll peel pull, right? You take like a word and you keep going deeper and deeper. Or the fact that you can't stand straight, like that has any relevancy in your life at all, except to crush you and to demoralize you. And that you have to be studying all day long. So if you're studying all day long, you don't really have time to work and to interact with people, to have even desires for that matter, right? And so you start to create a person who becomes more and more beat up, and it's too late. At a certain point, they just can't wake up anymore. It's like the frog in the boiling water, right? You take a frog and you throw him into the boiling hot water, he's just going to jump out. But if you put him in lukewarm water and then you slowly raise the temperature, he actually won't notice the difference and he'll just die. Yeah. And so that is like how you fool the frog into cooking him alive.
That's how you cook frogs.
It's how you cook anything alive, right? So it's like at the end of the day, they're cooking people alive, you know, and it's destroying lives.
And they have the rules down to a T, like how to weaponize people's humanity against them, you know, just toe the line so that people don't reject it entirely until, you know, they're cooked. So it's, you know,
well, that's the thing. It's like you could take a core value, the number one thing, the first thing that God asked of mankind: be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. And I'd say that the religious are still doing that, right? But life is broader than actually just bringing a child into life, right? It's the connections that are made, what you're doing for the world, the work, the interactions, the quality. And like, that's really what life is, you know, like life needs to be beaming out of somebody. When you see somebody, you're like, oh man, he's so full of life, right? You know, he could be high testosterone, perhaps, maybe a very energetic, magnetic person. But I would say that those are traits that are in line with life. And if you create a culture where even the children that are born into it, they're not living, it's like living dead. It's like the culture that we live in now with the men and the women, their confusion of gender, TikTok and brain rot. And
well, think about it like this. One of the holy narratives of the yeshiva world is that men should sit and learn Talmud all day and their wives should work, you know, yet they're having kids. So thank God they're having kids. But then, as you say, they're fulfilling, be fruitful and multiply. But if there's so many distorted things going on and, you know, the imbalance of male and female, how well is that going to end up? You know? And so, yeah, it's these narratives that really harm people.
Well, it is funny because we saw this movie, Zardos, with Sean Connery in it. And it's actually a good one. And the premise of the film is that people are still alive, but they found a way to remove things like violence and death even from living. And it's created only a select few elite people who live above everybody else, who continue to kill and murder. Actually, they're encouraged to do those things so that they don't pay attention to the elite. And they've eliminated things like death. By the way, there's no need for sex anymore because there's no need to bring life into the equation either. And those are the most awful people in the whole film.
Well, they have like humans in like bags.
Just
they just make humans like out of their, you know, tools,
they're
whatever.
also stuck there.
Yeah,
they're stuck there in an infinite loop.
Yeah.
Nobody can have sex with each other.
Of course.
I mean, they do this in a lot of really good movies like Demolition Man as well. You know, he wakes up in the future and there's no violence anymore, you know, and
also no sex.
There's also no sex. I mean, that's the thing. It's like when you remove sex is such a pivotal action in existence. Like it's how life is created, and it should be treated like such as well. It's a great shame, and it really bothers me because even I myself, I struggle with it. I don't know entirely where to land with the whole thing, which is like, well, when you eliminate it completely, you have serious harm, right? You have the removal of life. But if you were to do it without following through with the purpose of it, then you're
really doing it right.
Well, not only not really doing it right, but you're also you're going into perhaps wrathful territory in which God will punish you for these things. And if somebody has true fear of God, it's genuinely concerning. And there's not a lot of alternatives. Like most men are completely lonely, and women won't even talk to them. Like look what we were dealing with the Starbucks, just overhearing conversations somebody had, and they were saying some guy walked up to her. No, I'm not even going to have this right now. No, you know, and not to mention that 2 of the 4 workers over there are trannies, like men with tits and probably no peen, you know.
No, and to me what was so fascinating is that she's fuming that a man came over to her to ask her for her number, right? And it's like, well, how else is a man supposed to meet you? You know, like there's zero consideration.
Through text.
Yeah, like there's no consideration of how life actually even could or should play out. That much resistance, you know, like it's insane. It's insane that this has even become people's mindsets.
Well, when you remove the values, people start to live in that fashion. And if they don't value it, then everybody accepts it. You know, like, it's very strange to see a man in his 60s in pink bicycle shorts. You're basically just booty shorts for the girls at the gym.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And nobody's going to give him any problem. You know, we saw a woman with a beard the other day at a cafe, right? And she's there with her child. Like, I'm heartbroken, you know, like, you think that child's life is going to be normal? Like, he's going to grow up and he's going to have success. He's not going to have insane levels of anxiety and confusion.
It's devastating.
It's devastating. Like, dude, his mom has a beard. His mom has a beard.
And his other mom is a 6 foot, 300-pound woman.
Oh, yeah. That's what's funny about the whole thing. The smaller one, the less masculine, the one who went through the hormone changes.
Yeah.
And the more masculine one decided not to. It's just so strange. Like, you see the backwards thought and how harmful it is. Like, that poor baby, you know, he's pure. Like, all babies are pure.
It's a baby.
He's a baby.
My God. I mean, it's.
And it's like literally better in the foster system than it is out there. Like, seriously.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Oh my God. Yeah.
Just even to think of that reality is just,
dude, it's
heartbreaking.
It's horrifying.
Well, this is the world that we live in, and it's like, well, you wonder how we ended up here. And it's like, well, we ended up here because of the years of action towards godless things, and that it doesn't have any consequences.
And the Torah really says how to treat these things.
Yes, it does.
It's a red line all across the board. You know, even cross-dressing.
That's why we follow it. That's why I follow it. Yeah, woman. I mean, look, we went out with 2 different women, both 24. Both live with gay guys.
Yeah.
That's crazy. 2 gay guys, 2 different, this girl is, well, one lives in Los Angeles.
One lives in Northridge.
No, one lives in Northridge, okay. But
one is from Thailand.
Thailand, dude. She's fucking Thailand. Yeah. One was a Hispanic girl, you know, and I mean, imagine that parallel though, you know, like, oh, so what do you do with your time? Like, well, I decided to move in with 2 gay guys. Like, what? Like, that what you're doing with your time? That's what life is? How is that normal, by the way? Like, that's not normal. This also doesn't have any benefits. Like I told her, I was like, you know, at the end of the day, like, if you're going to get attacked by, like, she gets all the benefits, right? Because she can get to enjoy perhaps cute, handsome men, right? Their energy, their masculinity. Also, they're stronger, they're helpful. Men are like that. And they don't have to worry about any sexual tension. And there's no boundaries on conversation either, is because you're dealing with people who are disgusting, right? So, like, what you do is non-problematic for sure. You know, they're willing to cross boundaries you can't come back from. And my goodness, you know, what a life for these things to be normal. I'm speaking here, not feeling that anything that I'm saying is crazy at all. You know, I don't really care how it feels for the camera. Like, there's got to be people out there, God willing, a majority of them, who feel this way about their living situation. You know, like, what are we supposed to say about the porn thing? The porn thing's really bad. You know, most men are jerking off, and they've created AI girlfriends. Bro, AI girlfriends? What do you think happens to women? This is not good for women either. The women are interacting with these men, you know, and
and they're becoming multimillionaires off of it.
This is the thing, is the reward system in the modern day for doing things like porn and showing off your body and acting, that is what's considered a success, and that's what's worth doing. Most life is not looking like that. Like, these are the elite few, you know, like, not everybody's Leo DiCaprio, okay? And like, the acting world is a good representative of that, because everybody wants to be an actor, but ultimately you come to LA to have your dreams crushed, to make nothing, to make garbage and be somebody else's whore. It's just another form of pimping.
The Torah outlaws whoredom amongst the children of Israel, not a man whore or a woman whore.
Well, the Jews created Hollywood. I'm saying, look at the hypocrisy and how often, time and time again, these people fall into their own traps.
Yeah. And all because they abandoned God. And that's very clear. If you read Deuteronomy, it's because you've abandoned my Torah. That's why. That's what happens. And
It's funny how the Jews haven't come to that
textbook
conclusion.
for the Jews. Textbook.
Like, oh, we like, can you imagine as an Orthodox Jew that, or any of these religious Jews that have been keeping up the Talmudic practice, which is basically where all of the origins of the rabbi and the Orthodox and the Hasidic and the Chabad, they all originate from the Gemara and the Talmud being the train of thought that you're supposed to follow. I completely dispute that thought. I'm completely against it. That's why I'm willing to say these things, because there's simply no consequence to say that. And when you look at the lifestyle that those people had been following, they never came to the conclusion that there's one of two things that are happening. Either we're not observant, and that's why we're in this situation, or the way that we're doing the observance is wrong. Those are the two conclusions. So there's for sure a blanket statement. Yes, 80% of Jews are non-practicing, and there's a very good reason why they wouldn't be practicing.
Despite that, they are non-practicing.
Yeah, but the non-practicing people, a lot of the time comes from the fact that they can see through the lies of the literature, right? And the literature creates a standard that's impossible to follow.
Yeah, you can't penetrate it. Yeah.
Only the dumb and broken are willing to do that.
Yeah.
And the handful of people who have benefits from that basically run it like a communist thing. Because like at the end of the day, the religious people are not fucking thriving, no matter how you say it. I'm sorry. There's one rabbi, there's 18 different delinquents on the table, okay? You go to the shul, everybody's dumb and poor, okay? There's maybe one guy who's rich, but he's definitely not even close to as rich as the non-observant Jew. The guy doesn't give a fuck about all of this. And it's true, like that is the observation from the culture. At a certain point, you're going to have to tell yourself, like, well, if the promise is true, then we're going to experience wrath for not doing this, right? 80% of us are not following. Then you look at the 20% of us, and the 20% of us don't even follow the literature that's in that book. We're fucked, we were fucked, and we continue to become that way.
The wrath is promised, and it's frightening.
Yeah.
And I encourage Jews to read it, even just to know this is what God said to your people. It's some intense things, and what's crazy.
It provokes profanity.
Yes, it's very provoking.
Yeah. I mean,
well, something to think about is that the Hasidic people really Rebbe focused their cult even more.
Mm-hmm.
And they would say things that like the rabbi is the pipeline to God, kind of like the Rabbi Nachman stuff. Right?
Let's get deeper. The Mishnah and the Talmud created essentially heaven and hell.
Yeah.
Like from the
Christianity
of the
follows
Jews.
Judaism in a lot of these.
They basically came. I know that people like to comment like a 200-300 year difference, but it's ultimately the same timeline. Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism are almost identical.
They developed at the exact same time.
Yes, exactly. And they both ran with these ideas. The Messiah, extremely harmful, terrible. We just said it. Well, first of all, elitism, right?
Yeah.
Elitism. You have
they're upholding the Messiah. They're upholding a New Testament, right?
I mean, ultimately,
and
they're both upholding their own set of laws. Okay, and
yeah, and again, and they're holding the rabbi / Jesus, as their pipeline to God, as their way to the Father. And if you really wanted to just access God Himself, that's in the Torah. That's in the 5 books of Moses. And there's no limitation on the individual to act on the basis of God Himself. And God actually says, you and your children should return to me and I will redeem you. Right? And so it's very direct between God and the individual. So the idea that your entire conception of God should be based off of the 2,000-year traditions maintained, man-made things, like that shouldn't be your
everything.
basis.
There needs to be a distinction between the tradition and the law, okay? And there is no distinction drawn not from any of the religious institutions. And then when they step in to say, oh, no, my rabbi did this, and then you're like, well, then why did they add all this stuff? And then they'll say, oh, it's because just the people are bad over there. And it's like, okay, well, then what about this? What about the Bolshevik Revolution? What it's like, you get further and further, like, oh. It's like, well, you have to take accountability right now. There's an issue. You have Stockholm Syndrome. Right? You keep going back to your abuser, which is there's all these bad things, but there's no but. There's no but. Yeah. You end that relationship, okay? Mm-hmm. If it's attached If it's attached to your arm, you take off the arm. Okay?
Oof.
That's what you need to do. You got to get rid of it. Remember, somebody's caught under a drowning, right? And like a car's on their arm or something, you're either going to die or you're going to take the arm off. There are certain people who will bite the arm off. They'll literally bite their arm off. There's that thing with the guy who cut his whole arm off. He was stuck in between two boulders. They made a movie about it. You ever hear about this? Insane stuff. I mean, look, the survival instinct's very, very strong. But really only people who value life would be willing to push themselves like that. You know, God willing, that stuff has to happen to anybody, but there's not a lot of alternatives.
Yeah, I mean, we're encouraged to love God and to fear God, and both of those things make a lot of sense. And there's sometimes people have a bad reaction to fear of God, but it's literally the most rational thing possible, to fear God.
Yeah, what else are you gonna? Yeah. What else really worth fearing?
Yeah, and who else worth loving? So it's
well, there are plenty of people to fear and to love. I don't think people should be stupid. I don't want to undermine all of most people's feelings on that.
Sure, it's just when it comes down to
the right? highest level of fear.
Well, the highest, and by the way, that's where everyone is found, right? God creates all of us. He does all this for us, with us, and what we must do for him. He tells us.
Well, he's already given us the standard. He's given us a literature that we can all follow. For me, at a certain point, it's tiresome, but this is the entirety of my life by the literature standpoint. So if you are Jewish, then you're presented with these questions that you should be asking yourself. Maybe God doesn't have to come into question of whether or not he existed. I had a very similar relationship with that growing up, where personally, no matter what train of thought I went through or trauma or whatever, I always seem to come back to God is the source of all of it. There has to be a source, a something that's just beyond our comprehension that we simply can't understand, And I would have dialogues with whatever that was, and whatever people labeled that, it's still a thing that you know. It's a thing that you know and you interact with every single day. That thing is far more complex and interacts with you in far more ways than just that. But already that alone is an example of God in your life. And I know so many people who have that, you could undermine it and say it's just my internal dialogue, maybe. But maybe it's not also. I think maybe be a little open to some of these things.
Yeah, well, I think people definitely need to be open to the idea of God, that's just fundamental and quite important and relevant, So,
well, look, it's the source of my life, it's the source of your life. I'm not sure the actual direction of all of this because, when I sit down here in the camera and I have these conversations, it's a benefit to my life simply to express realities for me because it only makes me more confident in my ability to express and to exchange and to feel that my opinions are valid. And people are going to say what they're going to say anyways. But if you don't really care, then that it's going to allow you to gain from it. And my life has been in positive trajectory because of these things. And the hurdles that have come my way seem to just be hurdles that people experience in life. And if you know nothing about it and you're stuck in a bubble, the likelihood of you reaching success is very small, right? And I think it should be other people's interests that other people are successful as well. I don't want to live in a world where not everybody's beaming, don't you want everybody to beam and to join in on you? Or do you want to live in this lonely life where nobody interacts, nobody cares about each other, and nobody does things for you that you couldn't already imagine? That's one of the most fulfilling things ever. Somebody does an act of kindness, or they actually even go above and beyond in order to show you that you matter and you care. That's treating your neighbor like yourself. That's living in a world where God is present. And the focus is to serve. The focus is to serve, and we get all these wonderful benefits that come with it. I feel so strongly that life is blessed and it is a blessing, even though it has curses, and there are curses that we can identify.
And that's one of the huge themes in the Torah is that you can do it. It is achievable.
Even the blessing and the curse, by the way, these are real things in the present moment, not heaven, not hell. That's what I wanted to discuss earlier, that the Christian and the Judaic faith, when they branched off from God's law, created heaven and hell. And heaven and hell is such nonsense. I don't mind. Actually, I know it's real, right? That there is
Heavenly states and
the
hellish
heavenly
states,
state and
yes.
the hellish state.
But the invention
Clearly, but the
of
invention
it
of
being
what's going
totally
on
in the afterlife and then knowing exactly how it works.
the same way that, like, there's your school, right? There's your deathbed, and then there's heaven and hell, and like you can draw pictures of it, and you know what's going on, and people are like, "Oh, I've been there, I see shit," and it's like, no, you haven't. I'm sorry. This is just a tool of control to make up. If you want to call it fantasy and you want to put it in a book, it's extremely engaging, right?
If you want to call it fantasy.
Yeah, but I'm saying even what people make on the screens, right? The depictions of heaven and hell are very engaging.
Sure.
We love it as a concept too. It's like, oh, I get like all these goody points.
Yeah,
and,
but
like,
when
after it's all done, like at the end of the day, we don't really know what's going to be.
When it becomes
on.
a religious belief, it becomes a dogma. You now have to believe that this is literally how it is, the way it is.
Well, also, like, there are so few absolutes, right? So if we're going to die, right, you cannot tell me what is going to happen at that point, right? We don't know what happens then. We never knew. We also don't know what happened before our conception. We can barely remember. Most people can barely remember like the beginning of their childhood because there's so much fucking trauma. And like, there's that one dude that says, like, "I remember the second I was born," but we're not going to talk about that guy. Well, look, I don't have much else on my mind personally. It's a bit of an expression. I'm just simply getting it out there. Like, this is me and this is my life. Perhaps people enjoy the biblical content and what we're going through. Like, we live in Los Angeles, right? I own a boxing gym. I own an indoor playground. I love the people that I surround myself with every day. I feel very blessed to have that environment, and we want to help people who never got help in their lives, and that's either the abused and the drug, or in their homes, which ended up in prison and, post incarceration, or even struggling athlete. Like, you got to show up every day and in order to fight people your entire life, barely make any money. Then you have to pay for food, lodging, clothing, gym membership, and management. We're a place that wants to give that entirely for free, and we do. So I would say that's a godly environment. The only reason it can exist is because of my personal belief and the people in there who share that belief, that God is the source who brought us together, and we want to do something greater and bigger.
He wants us to be charitable.
Yeah. What's crazy from the funding standpoint of things, from business, nonprofits, if they're going to be getting funding, if it's not personal, most of the funding is coming from the federal. So the government is paying for these things. And there's government programs that are paying tons and tons of money, like way more than you could possibly, if the criteria, first of all, is non-discriminatory, but you also have to support LGBTQ shit. Tons and tons of money, right? And then you have private donors who can essentially donate based on the cause. Most religious donations are coming from private donors, not from the government. It used to be the case, apparently, back in Clinton. Clinton released because of the separation between church and state. But it's like, let's be honest with what actually works. AAs, the foundation of AAs is a belief in a higher power, in God, than a belief in God. And that's what helps people get better. Why wouldn't we be funding those things with a ton of the government money? That's my fucking tax-paying dollars. Why? Because it's church and state. We keep going back there. No, look, that's a slippery slope. I'm not entirely down to get into that. And I kind of agree with the general statement for this country. It's been working for a long time, right? But if the faith works, run with it. And so we're also walking with God because He blesses us, He protects us, He loves us, and that's a very focal point to be focusing on for a lot of people, because if you don't come upon that discovery in my way, which is very unique and hated and niche, or the same with you, if you still come upon God and you start to follow these laws, however you come to it, your life is going to be blessed and God is going to be with you, because we're all His children and we all bow to the laws of life that were created by Him. I'm humbled to live a new day tomorrow and to be able to do this with you now.
Amen.
Hey, amen.